Deep in Devil's Sinkhole, Leo Carter raises the same camera that captured Elias Finch's final moments 35 years ago. Before him now, the blinding rift that swallowed Elias. Beside him, the silent static figure, watching. The shutter clicks. What impossible truth does the final frame reveal? What happens when the light touches him? The answer rewrites everything we thought we knew. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. Subscribe now. The final frame changes the mystery forever. The rain lashed against the windshield like frantic fingers trying to get in. Leo Carter squinted through the blur, the wipers groaning against the torrential downpour that had swallowed New Jersey's Pine Barrens whole. Ancient, gnarled pines whipped past, their forms distorted ghosts in the storm's gray fury. His GPS had given up 10 miles back, a victim of the Barrens' notorious dead zones. Now, navigating by fading memory and a crumpled paper map, Leo felt a familiar prickle of unease. This place, vast and silent and older than memory, always held secrets close. He wasn't looking for secrets tonight, just shelter. His planned camping trip was a washout. That's when he saw it, almost missed in the gloom and the sideways rain. A crooked shape barely distinguishable from the surrounding trees. A cabin. It leaned precariously, its wood weathered to the color of old bone, shingles missing like rotten teeth. Part of the roof had caved in. It looked forgotten, abandoned decades ago. Perfect. Leo wrestled his old Jeep Cherokee off the muddy track and killed the engine. The sudden silence was startling, filled only by the drumming rain on the roof and the wind's mournful howl through the pines. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path through the downpour as he sprinted towards the sagging porch. The door hung open, one hinge rusted through, creaking softly with each gust. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else, a faint, metallic tang like old pennies. The beams swept across a single, cramped room. Dust motes danced in the light. A rusted iron stove squatted in one corner. A broken chair lay on its side nearby. Cobwebs draped everything like gray lace. Against the far wall, beneath a grimy window cracked like a spider's web, something caught the light. Not wood, not stone, something boxy and black. Leo moved closer, his boots crunching on grit and dead leaves. It was a camera. An old, professional-looking SLR camera, coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. It sat upright on a crumbling wooden crate, as if carefully placed there. He picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, solid. Wiping the grime from the body with his sleeve, he revealed worn leather covering and faded chrome. A Nikon F3, top of the line in the early 80s. His grandfather had owned one. Who left this here? And why did it feel intentional? He turned it over. Engraved on the base plate, barely visible beneath scratches in time, were initials. Yef. A shiver, unrelated to the damp chill, traced his spine. He knew that name. Everyone remotely interested in local history or unsolved mysteries knew that name. Elias Finch, the brilliant, reclusive photographer who drove into the Pine Barrens one crisp October afternoon in 1983 and never drove out. Search parties combed the dense woods for weeks. No car, no body, no trafe. Elias Finch became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered about the Barrens. Could this be? Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. Impossible. Yet here it was. He examined it under the beam. The film advance lever was cocked. He pressed the rewind button on the bottom and tentatively turned the rewind crank. It moved stiffly, then smoothly. There was film inside, a whole roll, untouched for 35 years. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed the broken door shut with a crash that made Leo jump, dropping the flashlight. It rolled, casting crazy, spinning shadows across the walls and ceiling. In the momentary chaos, Leo's gaze snagged on the camera's frame counter window, illuminated by the fallen beam. The small red numbers were clearly visible. It showed 36 foot. A full roll of 35mm film usually held 36 exposures. Had Elias Finch taken every single shot before vanishing? What had he seen? What had he captured in that final hour? Leo picked up the flashlight, his hand trembling slightly. The storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by a deeper, more unsettling silence within the decaying walls. The weight of the camera in his hands felt immense, charged with decades of unanswered questions. He wasn't just holding an old camera. He was holding the last known possession of a man swallowed by the wilderness. And whatever images lay trapped on that film were the only echoes left of Elias Finch's final journey. The rain drummed on, a relentless counterpoint to the sudden, deafening mystery sitting cold and heavy in his palm. The Pine Barrens had given up one secret, only to deepen the shadow around another. Leo knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the damp air, that he couldn't leave without knowing what the camera had seen. The first step was getting this fragile, ancient film developed. But the thought of what might emerge from the chemical bath filled him not with excitement, but with a profound, creeping dread. The silence in the cabin felt watchful now, as if the very walls remembered Elias Finch and held their breath for what came next. The storm still raged outside the crumbling motel window, its fury a physical thing shaking the thin walls. Rain hammered the glass like desperate fists. Inside room 7, the air hung thick with the smell of damp carpet, stale smoke, and something else, the sharp chemical bite of developing fluid. Leo Carter sat hunched on the edge of the lumpy bed, elbows on knees, staring at the cheap plastic table where the old Nikon F3 lay disassembled. Beside it sat Hank, a man whose face seemed carved from the same ancient, weathered oak as the Pine Barrens trees. Hank ran the last functioning photo lab within 50 miles, a cramped cave of a shop smelling of fixer and nostalgia. Never seen film this old, Hank rasped, his voice like gravel under tires. He held a strip of negatives up to the weak light of a gooseneck lamp. His thick fingers, stained yellow-brown from decades of chemicals, trembled slightly. 35 years buried in that damp hellhole. It's a miracle it held together at all. Took real care, real, gentle coaxing. He squinted, moving the strip slowly. But it held. Every frame. Leo's heart thudded against his ribs. He'd barely slept since leaving the cabin, the weight of the camera and its hidden cargo pressing on him. The drive through the storm had been a blur of nerves and pounding rain. Finding Hank, open late only because he lived above the shop, felt like fate. Now, anticipation warred with a deep, unsettling dread. Can you see anything? Anything clear? Hank grunted, not taking his eyes off the negatives. Glimpses. Shapes. Like ghosts swimming in soup. Need the prints to tell the real story. He carefully laid the negatives down and reached for the first damp print emerging from the chemical bath in his small portable tray. He used tongs to lift it, dripping, holding it up. The single bare bulb overhead cast harsh shadows. Leo leaned forward, breath catching. The image was grainy, washed with age and damage, but unmistakable. It showed the cabin, not as Leo found it, crumbling and open to the storm, but whole. Intact. The door was firmly shut, and standing before it, caught mid-stride, turning towards the camera with an expression that wasn't startled, but expectant, was a man. Lean, with intense eyes beneath unruly dark hair, wearing practical outdoor clothing. He held a camera strap in one hand. Elias Finch, sweet mother of... Hank breathed, the print trembling in the tongs. That's him, ain't it? The vanished fella. Leo could only nod, a lump in his throat. Seeing Elias Finch, alive and seemingly unharmed, mere moments before he disappeared, was profoundly jarring. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was a man captured seconds before oblivion. The detail was unnerving. The texture of his jacket, the focused intensity in his eyes. He looked utterly present, utterly real. Hank laid the print carefully on a drying rack and plunged the tongs back into the bath for the next one. The seconds stretched, filled only by the drumming rain and the faint hiss of the fixer. The second print emerged. It was darker, taken later. The cabin stood stark against a twilight sky bruised purple and orange. But it wasn't the sky that held Leo's gaze. Elias stood in the same spot, but now he wasn't looking at the cabin. His head was tilted sharply upwards, his body rigid. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. Not fear. Awe. His mouth was slightly open, as if caught mid-exclamation. He pointed upwards, towards something just beyond the frame's top edge. What's he looking at? Leo whispered, the hairs on his arms standing up. The sheer intensity of Elias's reaction was terrifying. It wasn't the look of a man lost or scared. It was the look of someone witnessing the impossible. Hank shook his head slowly, his weathered face pale. Don't know, son. Ain't nothing but trees and sky up there usually. He fished out the third print. This one was blurry, chaotic. The cabin was a dark smudge to one side. Elias was running, not away from the cabin, but towards the trees, towards whatever he'd been pointing at. His figure was streaked with motion blur, conveying frantic speed. His face was turned back towards the camera, but it was impossible to read his expression in the smear of movement. Only the direction was clear. He was sprinting into the deepening gloom of the Barrens. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damn motel room. Elias wasn't fleeing in terror. He was chasing something, or being drawn. He ran towards it, Leo murmured, a statement heavy with implication. The fourth print was almost entirely dark. Grainy shadows suggested trees. In the very center, barely visible, was a tiny point of light. Not a star. It seemed lower, hovering just above the tree-line. It had an unnatural intensity, a piercing whiteness that burned through the film grain despite the low light. Below it, almost lost in the murk, was a suggestion of movement, a dark shape that might have been Elias, dwarfed by the trees and that single, brilliant point. The composition felt deeply wrong, unsettling. The light seemed to pull at the eye, radiating a sense of immense power and distance. Hank exhaled sharply, a low whistle escaping his lips. That ain't no plain light. Ain't no star. He sounded genuinely spooked. Looks like a hole punched in a night. Leo couldn't tear his eyes away. The point of light felt alive, watching. It was the focal point of the entire sequence, the source of Elias's awe, the thing he ran towards. The silence in the room thickened, oppressive. The storm outside felt suddenly distant, insignificant compared to the silent scream emanating from the photograph. Hank worked faster now, driven by a morbid curiosity that mirrored Leo's own. Prints 5 through 10 showed a harrowing sequence. Elias deeper in the woods, illuminated only by that strange, unwavering point of light which seemed to follow him, always just out of reach. The forest around him looked different, twisted. The familiar pines seemed sharper, their branches claw-like against the unnatural glow. The ground appeared strangely luminous in patches, as if reflecting light from an unseen source. In one frame, Elias was kneeling, touching the glowing ground with a look of intense concentration. In another, he was looking back, his face etched not with fear, but with a profound, almost sorrowful urgency. Print 11 was a close-up of Elias's face, startlingly clear despite the low light. He stared directly into the lens, his eyes wide and filled with an emotion impossible to fully decipher. A turbulent mix of wonder, terror, and understanding. His mouth was forming a word. Leo leaned in, squinting. Was it look, or a light, or something else entirely? The ambiguity was maddening. Print 12 stopped Leo's heart. It wasn't Elias. It was the cabin again, seen from a distance through the trees. But standing on the sagging porch, silhouetted against the weak light leaking from within the closed door, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its outline blurred and indistinct like static given form. It wasn't human. It faced the woods, towards where Elias had run. The sheer wrongness of the shape sent a primal jolt of fear through Leo. It looked like a watcher, a sentinel. Hank dropped the tongs with a clatter. What in God's name? His voice was a hoarse whisper, choked with disbelief. That ain't Finch. That ain't anything I ever seen. The final prints were fragments of nightmare. Print 13, a blinding flare of that unnatural white light, engulfing the frame, washing out all detail except the stark black silhouettes of trees. Print 14. Utter darkness, punctuated only by faint, glowing orbs hovering amongst the trunks. Eyes? Reflections? Print 15. A single, clear shot of an object resting on the forest floor. It was a small, smooth stone, unnaturally spherical, glowing with a soft, internal blue light. It looked alien, utterly out of place. And then, print 36. The last frame. It wasn't the woods. It wasn't a cabin. It was a photograph of a photograph. A picture, slightly blurred, held in a trembling hand. The image within the image showed a much younger Elias Finch, grinning broadly, arm around a dark-haired woman with kind eyes. His wife, Sarah, Leo realized, recognizing her from old news clippings. They stood on a sunny beach, happiness radiating from the faded colors. Someone, Elias, in his final moments, had taken a picture of this cherished memory. Why? A final thought of home before what? Hank carefully laid the last print down, his hands visibly shaking. The drying rack held 36 windows into Elias Finch's final, terrifying hour, all replaced by obsession, a desperate chase into a forest transformed, glimpses of impossible light and impossible shapes, ending with a poignant echo of a life left behind. The silence in the motel room was deafening, broken only by the relentless rain. Leo stared at the array of images spread before him. They didn't show a murder. They showed something far stranger, far more unsettling. Elias hadn't been attacked. He'd been captivated. He'd followed something extraordinary into the heart of the Barrens and never returned. The camera hadn't recorded a crime. It had recorded an encounter. An encounter with what? The glowing light? The impossible figure? The very forest itself? Leo picked up the final print, the picture within a picture. Elias's smiling face, frozen in a moment of pure joy, felt like a cruel counterpoint to the chilling sequence that preceded it. What had he seen? What had drawn him in? And where, in the vast, silent, watchful expanse of the Pine Barrens, was Elias Finch now? The camera had been found, its secrets partially revealed. But the deeper mystery, the profound, unsettling truth behind those shocking photos, had only just begun. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in Leo's mind. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he couldn't walk away. The Barrens had shown him its teeth. He had to see where they led. The weight of the photos felt like lead in Leo's worn backpack as he navigated the quiet, tree-lined streets of Millville. 2 days had passed since the storm, since Hank's cluttered motel room and the silent scream of Elias Finch's final frames. Sleep was impossible. The images played behind his eyelids. The impossible light, the distorted figure on the porch, Elias's face etched with that terrifying mix of awe and urgency. The pictures offered no answers, only deeper, darker questions. He needed context. He needed the one person who knew Elias best, Sarah Finch. Finding her hadn't been easy. Decades of silence, a life lived under the shadow of a vanished husband, had made her a ghost in public records. It took a dusty archive visit and a sympathetic librarian whispering, "She keeps to herself." The old Miller place, out past the reservoir. Don't expect a welcome. The librarian's eyes held a familiar unease, the kind the Pine Barrens seemed to breed. The Miller place wasn't welcoming. It was a small, weathered farmhouse, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, tucked behind overgrown lilac bushes that choked the front path. The air was thick with the drone of cicadas and the heavy scent of damp earth. Leo hesitated at the rusted gate, the backpack straps biting into his shoulders. He felt exposed, a trespasser bringing ghosts to a doorstep that wanted only peace. He knocked. The sound echoed hollowly. Silence stretched. He knocked again, louder. This time, shuffling footsteps approached from within. The door creaked open a few inches, held by a sturdy chain. One eye, sharp and wary, peered out. It was an old woman's eye, surrounded by deep lines, but the gaze was surprisingly clear and intense. Yes. Her voice was dry, like autumn leaves skittering on pavement. "Mrs. Finch?" "Sarah Finch." Leo's own voice felt too loud in the quiet. My name is Leo Carter. I found something. Something belonging to Elias. The eye narrowed. The silence deepened, pressing in. Leo could feel her assessing him, the weight of years of suspicion and grief. Elias has been gone 35 years, she stated flatly. Anything he owned is dust by now. It's not dust, ma'am, Leo pressed gently. He shifted the backpack slightly. It's his camera, and the film inside it. The chain rattled. The door opened wider, revealing Sarah Finch fully. She was small, thin, wrapped in a faded cardigan despite the summer warmth. Her white hair was pulled back severely, but it was her eyes that held him, deep wells of sorrow, yes, but also a fierce, undimmed intelligence. They flickered over him, then down to the backpack. His camera, she breathed, the flatness gone, replaced by a tremor Leo couldn't decipher. Hope? Dread? You found it? Where? In the Barrens, Leo said. An old cabin. During the storm. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The film, it was still inside. I had it developed. Sarah Finch stared at him, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe. The cicada screamed. Finally, she stepped back, her gesture small but unmistakable. Come in. The inside was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. It smelled of beeswax, old paper, and a faint trace of lavender. Photographs covered the walls. Landscapes, mostly, stunning compositions of light and shadow. All signed Elias Finch. His presence was everywhere, yet the room felt profoundly empty. Sarah motioned Leo towards a worn armchair, then sat stiffly opposite him on a faded sofa. She didn't offer tea. She simply waited, her gaze fixed on the backpack at his feet. Slowly, with a reverence that felt necessary, Leo unzipped the pack and withdrew the thick envelope. He hesitated. They're unsettling, Mrs. Finch. They show his last moments. Her jaw tightened. I've lived with the unknown for 35 years, Mr. Carter. Show. Me. One by one, Leo laid the prints on the low coffee table between them. He started with the cabin intact, Elias turning expectantly. Sarah made a small, choked sound in her throat, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes devoured the image, tracing the lines of her husband's face, the familiar set of his shoulders. He looks alive, she whispered, the word thick with a grief Leo couldn't fathom. He placed the next, Elias staring upwards in awe. Sarah leaned forward, squinting. What was it, she breathed. He always said he felt things out there. Saw things. Leo continued. The chase into the woods. The distorted trees. The impossible light. The kneeling figure touching the glowing earth. With each image, Sarah grew paler, her breath shallower, but her eyes never left the photos. When the print of the thin, static-like figure on the porch emerged, she recoiled physically, pushing back into the sofa cushions. A low moan escaped her. No, she whispered. No, not that. Not again. Leo froze. Again? You've seen something like this before. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She stared at the horrific silhouette, her face ashen. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. Not seen, she finally rasped. Heard. From Elias. She tore her gaze from the photo, looking directly at Leo. Her eyes held a haunted depth. He wasn't just taking pretty pictures out there at the end, Mr. Carter. He was chasing a madness. She rose unsteadily and crossed to an ancient roll-top desk in the corner. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it and pulled out two thick, leather-bound journals. They looked old, the leather cracked and stained. She carried them back as if they weighed a ton, placing them gently beside the disturbing photo of the figure. He kept journals, she said, her voice barely audible. Always. But the last year, the entries changed. Became frantic. Obsessed. She opened the top journal, flipping pages filled with Elias's strong, looping script, notes on light conditions, film types, locations. Then, abruptly the tone shifted. Leo glimpsed phrases. Lights again last night. Lower than planes. Silent. Old man Henderson swears he saw a door in the mist near Devil's Sinkhole. Ridiculous? Or The trees near Black Run don't cast shadows right at noon. The angles are wrong. Sarah turned to a page near the end of the second journal. The writing here was jagged, urgent, the ink sometimes blotting as if written in haste or fear. Sarah thinks I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But the pattern is there. The lights, the cold spots, the disappearances. Not just animals. People. Vanished clean. Old reports. Sheriff's logs from the 1800s mention it. Strange lights, missing trappers. They called it the Barrens sickness. But it's not sickness. It's a place. A thin place. Leo frowned. A thin place. Sarah nodded grimly. He borrowed the term from old folklore. Places where the veil between worlds is thin. Where things bleed through. He became convinced the Barrens was riddled with them. Especially one place. Her finger, bony and shaking, tapped a specific entry. The date was October 14th, 1983. 3 days before Elias vanished. The entry was brief, almost frantic. Devil's Sinkhole. It has to be the locus. The light patterns converge there. The cold spot readings are off the charts. Henderson wasn't lying. Tomorrow, I have to go back. Final proof. If I can just capture it. If I can show them. The writing ended abruptly, mid-sentence. Devil's Sinkhole? Leo asked, the name sending a fresh chill down his spine. Sarah closed the journal with a soft thud. A collapsed cavern system, she explained, her voice flat with exhaustion. Deep in the Barrens. Dangerous. Treacherous ground. Elias was obsessed with it near the end. Said the energy there was alive. Wrong. She gestured weakly at the photos. He found it, didn't he? That light. That thing. He found it, and it took him. A single tear finally traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. Just like it took the others. Leo looked from the journals to the photo of the impossible figure, then to the last image, the picture within a picture of Elias and Sarah, young and happy on a sunlit beach. The contrast was heartbreaking. You believe that? That something took him. What else? Sarah asked, her voice a broken whisper. He wasn't a reckless man. He knew those woods. He wouldn't just vanish. Not without a trace. She looked at the photo of the figure again, pure dread in her eyes. That is the trace. Silence descended, thick and heavy. The weight of Elias's obsession, Sarah's decades of grief, and the terrifying evidence spread on the coffee table pressed down on Leo. He felt a reckless pull, the same pull he imagined Elias felt looking at that unnatural light. Devil's Sinkhole, the locus, the thin place. I need to see it, Leo said, the word surprising even him. Devil's Sinkhole. Sarah's head snapped up. Fear flashed across her face, sharp and immediate. No, don't be a fool. Look what happened to Elias. Look at that. She stabbed a finger towards the photo of the figure. You go poking around there, you won't come back either. You leave it alone, Mr. Carter. For God's sake, leave it alone. Leo met her terrified gaze. He understood her fear, shared it deeply. But the mystery had its hooks in him now. The photos, the journal, the sheer impossibility of it all. He couldn't unsee it. I have to know, Mrs. Finch. I have to see. Sarah stared at him, a long, searching look. She saw the same stubborn intensity that must have lived in Elias's eyes. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. Then you're as lost as he was, she murmured, turning away. The conversation was over. Leo carefully gathered the photos, returning them to the envelope. The journals remained on the table. He stood, the silence in the small house suddenly oppressive. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Finch, and for sharing these. He nodded towards the journals. She didn't look at him, just stared out the curtained window towards the distant, unseen Barrens. Take them, she said quietly, her voice drained. I don't want them anymore. They only bring the dark closer. Leo hesitated, then picked up the heavy journals. They felt like carrying tombstones. He walked to the door. As he opened it, the bright afternoon sunlight felt harsh, intrusive. He stepped onto the porch. Mr. Carter? Sarah's voice stopped him. He turned. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the gloom inside. Her face was in shadow, but her eyes seemed to gleam with a desperate intensity. If you do go, if you see him, Tell him. Her voice cracked. She couldn't finish. She simply shook her head once, sharply, and closed the door. The lock clicked with terrible finality. Leo stood on the path, the journals heavy under his arm, the envelope of photos burning a hole in his backpack. The cicada screamed. The scent of lilacs was suddenly cloying, overwhelming. As he walked back towards his car, parked at the overgrown curb, he felt it, a prickling sensation between his shoulder blades. The distinct, unsettling feeling of being watched. He glanced back at the house. The curtain in the front window twitched, then fell still. But the feeling didn't come from the house. It felt like it came from the trees, from the very air itself. It felt like it came from the direction of the Pine Barrens. The journey to Devil's Sinkhole wouldn't just be into the wilderness. It felt like stepping through the thin place Elias had described into a waiting darkness that had already marked him. The air inside Devil's Sinkhole wasn't just cold. It felt eaten. The damp chill gnawed through Leo's jacket, settling deep into his bones. Sunlight, weak and filtered through the dense canopy far above, barely penetrated the crater's depths, leaving the massive sinkhole swathed in perpetual, mossy twilight. The descent had been treacherous, crumbling edges, slick roots, and a silence so profound it pressed against his eardrums. Now, standing on the uneven floor littered with fallen trees and boulders like ancient, broken teeth, Leo felt impossibly small, and watched. He'd come prepared. Powerful LED lamps strapped to his helmet and vest cut beams through the gloom, revealing walls slick with moisture, draped in thick curtains of ferns and moss. The air smelled of wet earth, decay, and something faintly metallic like ozone after a storm. In his backpack, Elias's journals felt unnaturally heavy, a constant reminder of the photographer's obsession. The camera, Elias's Nikon F3, hung around Leo's neck, a tangible link to the man whose footsteps he was retracing. He hadn't planned to bring it, but at the last moment, a strange compulsion had made him slip the strap over his head. Following Elias's frantic journal entries was like deciphering a madman's map. Follow the cold draft. Leo shivered. The air currents were unnaturally icy near the northern wall. Listen for the hum beneath the wind. He strained his ears. Beyond the drip of water and the rustle of some unseen creature, there was something, a low, subsonic vibration he felt more than heard, a thrumming in his chest cavity that set his teeth on edge. It wasn't natural. It felt like the heartbeat of the earth itself, but wrong. Pushing through a thicket of thorny undergrowth, Leo's boot struck something hard. Not rock. He knelt, brushing away damp leaves and moss. A cluster of smooth, spherical stones, identical to the glowing one in Elias's final photos, lay half-buried. But they weren't glowing now. They were inert, cool to the touch, unnaturally perfect spheres of dark, glassy stone. He picked one up. It felt dense, heavier than it should. As he turned it in his light beam, for a fraction of a second, a faint, internal blue pulse seemed to flicker deep within its core. He blinked. Nothing. Just cold, dark stone. The ground remembers, Elias had scrawled in one feverish entry. Touching it, it shows you things. Not pictures. Feelings. Echoes. Leo hesitated, then pressed his palm flat against the damp, moss-covered earth beside the stones. The cold seeped into his skin, and then a jolt. Not physical. A wave of intense vertigo, a sudden, overwhelming sense of falling, not down but sideways. Images flashed behind his eyes, distorted trees bending under impossible light, a silhouette impossibly tall and thin against a starless sky, a surge of pure, unadulterated terror that wasn't his own. He snatched his hand back, gasping. The feeling lingered, a phantom chill crawling up his arm. Elias hadn't been imagining it. The place was alive with memory. Trapped echoes. He pushed deeper, the thrumming vibration growing stronger. The sinkhole walls narrowed, funneling him towards a darker cleft, partially obscured by a massive, fallen pine. The air here tasted sharp, electric. His helmet light swept the cleft. And there, embedded in the dark soil near the base, were more of the strange stones. Dozens of them, and these were glowing. A soft, pulsating blue light emanated from their cores, casting long, dancing shadows on the rock face. They formed a loose, irregular circle, like offerings at an altar, or markers. Leo approached slowly, the unnatural light washing over his hands, his face. The hum was almost deafening here, vibrating in his fillings. He remembered the photo Elias took, kneeling, touching the glowing earth. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't fight, Leo knelt at the edge of the circle. He didn't touch the stones directly, but placed his palm on the ground within their ring. The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. This wasn't a single echo. It was a cacophony. A whirlwind of fragmented sensations bombarded him, blinding white light searing his retinas, a sound like tearing fabric mixed with a high-pitched whine, the gut-wrenching pull of vertigo, a crushing weightlessness, a profound, soul-deep loneliness, and beneath it all, a terrifying, alien curiosity. He saw flashes, not with his eyes, but in his mind, the twisted trees from the photos, but shifting, breathing, the impossible point of light, now vast and intricate, like a doorway woven from pure energy. The thin, static-like figure, standing motionless, observing, always observing. And Elias. Not fear on his face now, but a desperate, yearning fascination, stepping towards the light, arms outstretched. The pull wasn't violent. It was seductive. Irresistible. Leo wrenched his hand away, staggering back, panting as if he'd run a mile. His heart hammered against his ribs. He understood now. Elias hadn't been taken. He'd been drawn. The light, the energy, it wasn't hostile. It was simply other. And Elias, the seeker, the man obsessed with capturing the impossible, had been utterly captivated. He'd walked into it, voluntarily. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the sinkhole, unnaturally loud. Leo spun, his light beams slicing through the gloom. It wasn't a branch breaking. It sounded like stones splitting. His beam landed on the rock face opposite the stone circle. The vibration intensified, shaking small pebbles loose. The thrumming became a roar in his ears. And then, high up on the shadowed wall, light bloomed, not the soft blue of the stones. This was the same piercing, impossible white light from Elias's photos. It wasn't a point source. It was a jagged, vertical seam opening in the rock itself, like a wound in reality. No heat radiated from it, only that intense, blinding whiteness and a wave of profound cold that stole Leo's breath. It pulsed, widening slightly, revealing nothing, an absolute, depthless void beyond the light. The tearing sound grew louder. Paralysis gripped Leo. Terror warred with the same awful, magnetic fascination he'd felt in the echo. It was beautiful, horrifyingly beautiful. The pull was tangible now, a physical force tugging at his clothes, his hair, whispering promises of answers, of seeing what Elias saw. Step closer. See. The thought wasn't entirely his own. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. He jerked his head. Down in the shadows, near the base of the cleft where the glowing stones pulsed brighter in response to the rift, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin. Its outline shimmered and blurred, like static on an old TV screen. It wasn't solid. It seemed woven from the gloom itself. The Watcher. It stood utterly still, facing the pulsing rift on the wall, its featureless head tilted slightly. It made no move towards Leo. It simply observed. The message was clear. This was the threshold, the thin place Elias had hunted. The Watcher was the guardian, the witness to whatever passed through. It didn't threaten, it just was. And it was waiting to see what Leo would do. The pull intensified. The light pulsed, beckoning. Leo thought of Sarah Finch's broken voice, her decades of grief. He thought of Elias's final photo, the picture of happiness held in his trembling hand before he stepped into the unknown. He thought of the echoes, the terrifying wonder, the crushing loneliness. Answers lay beyond that light. The ultimate answer to Elias Finch's vanishing. All he had to do was step forward. His hand moved without conscious thought. It found the familiar shape of the Nikon F3. He lifted it, the weight solid, grounding. He didn't look through the viewfinder. He simply pointed the lens towards the impossible rift, the static watcher, the circle of glowing stones. His finger found the shutter button. He pressed it. The camera's click was absurdly loud, a tiny, defiant sound against the roaring hum and the tearing light. Capture it. Show them. He took another photo, and another, documenting the impossible. Evidence. The light pulsed brighter, the tear widening fractionally. The static figure remained motionless. The pull was a physical ache now, a siren song vibrating in his very cells. He lowered the camera, the strap still tight around his neck. He looked at the rift, the void beyond the blinding white. He thought of Elias stepping into the light, arms outstretched. Not fear, awe. Leo Carter stood at the edge of the thin place, the last echoes of a vanished photographer whispering in his bones, the camera heavy against his chest. The sinkhole held its breath. The watcher observed. The light beckoned. His choice hung suspended in the electric, ancient air. He took one step, towards the light, towards the echo, towards the answer Elias had found 35 years before. The Nikon F3 swung gently against his ribs, its lens cap off, ready to capture whatever came next, or whatever remained. The silence after the shutter click felt deeper, heavier, filled only with the hum of the earth and the waiting.